I'd also like to invite on stage our panelists, Mr. Arnico Panday, Trustee and Interim CEO, Ullens Education Foundation, Ms. Bindu Bhandari, Change Campaigner and Policy Analyst, and Mr. Manjeet Dhakal, Head LDC Support Team Climate Analytics. So ladies and gentlemen, with this stage set on the discussion of mitigating climate change, the big connector, may I please request our moderator to now take over.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, distinguished guests, panelists, and speakers. It's so great to be here with all of you today. As you know, our panel today will be talking about climate change and the single greatest threat that humanity is facing today. We know climate change is a transnational issue. Emissions from one part of the world has the capacity to impact climate systems, ecological systems, and human societies in another part of the world, thousands of kilometers away. So obviously this is an issue that needs us to be connected very well and very pertinent to the issue of global connectivity as well. We have today a great panel with our three panelists. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Ms. Smriti Basnet, could not be here today. She is a glaciologist from Sikkim who is based in Bangalore. Unfortunately, she fell sick while she was traveling to Kathmandu. So, Smriti, if you're watching us today, we're really missing you here on stage. So let's start with a brief introduction of our panelists, starting with Ms. Bindu Bhandari. Bindu is a climate change campaigner and policy analyst, and she's been involved in training and mobilizing youth in climate action for quite some time now. She also works for the global think tank Climate Interactive. Bindu, if you could tell us more about the kind of work that you do in all of these roles.
Thanks so much, Isneha. Namaste, everyone. I just introduced. I am Bindu Bhandari, and I'm climate change campaigner and policy analyst. I come from the southern plains of Nepal, from Chitwan, and I'm based here in Kathmandu for 2 years now. So I'm actually a graduate in veterinary science, and I'm a passionate climate change campaigner for the last 7 years. So I started back in 2013, and I have worked with as a media professional back in 2016 and 17, and now I'm working for global diffusion of the interactive tools. So this may sound quite interesting, like my journey from being a veterinarian to climate change campaigner to the science communicator, but what I am trying to do is find the interconnectedness in the issue that I am addressing, climate change, but also in my potentials, like personally. So just trying to navigate through different potentials I have and the interconnectedness that we need to see to address complex but interconnected issues of this century. So currently what I am into is diffusing the interactive tools that are developed by the organization that I'm currently with, Climate Interactive. So what we do is we develop interactive tools that are grounded in the best available science together with our partner MIT Sloan, and we make these tools accessible and free of cost for people all around the world so that they can access it anytime they want. And through this, we have reached to over 93 countries worldwide and benefited around 83,000 people. So I am basically looking after the global diffusion and trying to reach out to the partners, because most of the times when we are addressing the issue of climate change, it's about people may not necessarily know where all those opportunities are, where all those informations are. Like there is a lot of information, but also a lot of myths, but how to really ground our thinking in the best available science. So through my work as someone responsible for the diffusion, I'm trying to make sure that everyone who needs the tools, from policymakers to the youth stakeholders, get it. So that is what I'm into now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bindu, and we'll definitely come back to you more and talk to you about your role with youths and the work that you're doing with Climate Interactive. Next, we're going to move on to Mr. Arnico Panday. Arnico is the CEO of Ullens Education, where he's working for the establishment of a new project, among other things. He was the regional program manager at ICIMOD's Atmosphere program. Arnico, if you could talk a little bit more about that.
So good morning. People often ask me how I knew years ago when I was studying that climate science, atmospheric science was going to be an important topic. And I tell them I didn't really know in advance. I knew it was important, but not that it would reach this level of importance today. But actually, when I joined college in 1992, the first class I sat in was a class on atmospheric science. And in it, we already then talked about how CO2 was increasing and how the climate system works. I ended up kind of meandering through taking classes in architecture, in planning, and environmental policy, and landscape ecology. And then later from my PhD, ended up back studying atmospheric science, looking at air pollution and the interactions between air pollution and climate, and went on to postdoctoral and faculty positions in the US, again, looking at atmospheric science issues in the Himalaya area. About 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to come back to ICIMOD to set up the atmosphere program, where we worked across the 8 countries of the Hindu Kush Himalaya region to address atmospheric issues. Again, interconnections between air pollution and climate, new science research, new data collection, but also policy mitigation. Actually, just 1 week ago, I started a new position. I'm now the CEO of Ullens Education Foundation, the nonprofit organization that is known for running Ullens School in Kathmandu, but with big plans to set up a liberal arts college just an hour drive outside of Kathmandu. So I'm kind of back in the academic world, still doing science as well, and still involved very much in atmospheric science and atmospheric policy issues, but really committed to training the next generation of leaders from across the region to address a topic as important as climate change.
Thank you so much, Arnico. And we're going to pull that thread a little bit, talk more about how education plays a role in inducing climate action as well. Next, we have Mr. Munchi Thapa. He's the head of LDC support team at Climate Analytics, where he also provides technical and strategic advisory support to least developed countries at the UNFCCC negotiations, better known as COP. Manjeet, if you could talk a little bit about your role.
Thank you, Sneha. Namaskar. Let me start by saying back about 15 years earlier, when I started involving on this topic on climate change, when I was doing my bachelor's degree at Trichandra College. Then after, when we used to involve in the cleanup campaign in Saimbu or in Pasupatinath or in a street in Ratna Park, distributing the paper bag to the people around, it helped me to understand what locally we can do when we think about this global problem. Later in 2009, 2008, we started the national youth movement in Nepal called Nepalese Youth for Climate Action. I happen to be and I'm very proud to be the first founder network coordinator for that network. And it's really nice now they have a network throughout the country. In 2009, I got an opportunity to be the first youth delegates to attend the UNFCCC conference as a national delegate of Nepal. I present myself, I'm no more in that category. I don't agree with the definition of our youth below 40 age. The understanding that we raised in our youth group was anyone beyond 28 should leave that responsibility to the younger generation. So what I do now, and in relating to this theme of connecting the world, is I work at the Global Forum at the UN climate negotiation, helping to breeze issues that we can take from Nepal to the global front, how we can customize our views, our ideas, and present it in the Global Forum. Next, I work with 47 least developed countries who has similar circumstances like Nepal. In past, I have served with Ethiopia, with Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola, and currently working with Bhutan. So I help connecting the similar circumstances of these least developed countries and what they can share to the world in terms of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manjeet, and your experience with international policy and related and revolving around climate change would be very valuable to this panel, and we can get back to that again. For now, I'd like to direct my first question to Arnico. Could you talk a little bit about the urgency to rapidly address climate change around Nepal, around the Himalayan region, and across the world as well?
So the understanding of climate change is not new. It's been known for a long time that burning fossil fuels and emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere would warm up the atmosphere. In fact, already 55 years ago, in 1965, prominent scientists in the US presented a report to then President Lyndon Johnson talking about the state of knowledge about the increasing carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere and what that would do to climate. If you read that today, everything in it is still true, and actually the new knowledge added for urgency of action isn't that much new. There's some new knowledge on various parts, but the key issues were already known then. But it's almost like at that time there was a little fire starting somewhere along the wall of your house. It could have been put out then. Instead, now we're in a situation where the entire roof is on fire. It's a much more difficult situation, and if we don't act soon, then we'll have much bigger issues. In fact, over the last year and a half or so, a number of key assessment reports have come out that really clarify the urgency of the issue now. There was the IPCC 1.5 degree report that looked at what would happen if global average temperatures rose beyond 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial. And the answer is pretty scary. The number of hurricanes, flood events, the amount of sea level rise, the extent to which we'd have major impact of climate change would increase significantly if we go above 1.5 degrees. We're already more than a degree above pre-industrial now. Also, that report mentions that we only have about 10 years left to reduce CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, or it's going to be too late and global average temperatures will exceed 1.5 degrees. The emission gap report says we're not on track to achieving that. Then the Hindu Kush Himalaya assessment, which came out a year ago, and as one of the coordinating lead authors on it, talks about even 1.5 degrees is actually too much for the Himalaya region. We'd still lose 1/3 of the glacier mass in the Himalayas. Under current scenarios, actually, we'd probably lose 2/3 of it by the end of the century. And in the high mountain areas, temperatures warm faster. So 1.5 degrees global average would be 1.8 to 2.3 degrees in the high mountain areas. There's also been an Asia-Pacific Solutions report, which really looks at what can be done about it and where are there ways to reduce both climate change and air pollution, and often their sources are interlinked, that would have the most benefit both for human health as well as for climate. And it focuses not just on end of tailpipe emissions from vehicles and industries, but also on forest fires and crop residue burning, switching to cleaner cooking, to electric vehicles. I think overall the sense is pretty clear. We cannot go on as we have been. We cannot keep increasing the amount of fossil fuels being used. We cannot keep increasing the amount of air travel. The world being imagined with interconnectivity, with increased air travel, with increased tourism, with increased activities that change the climate, that's not going to happen. In fact, the whole debate about Nijgar, the airport there, it's not even just about the trees there. I think by the time the airport will be built, air travel will not be the way it is anymore. We cannot move to larger numbers of people traveling more frequently. It has to be fewer people having higher value experiences. And I think that's part of what we need to think about also for tourism in Nepal. Anything that's fossil fuel powered needs to go down. There is no other choice. The roof's on fire. We need to do something before it collapses. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnico, for that brief summary of all the important reports surrounding climate change, especially in the Himalayan region. I would like to direct my next question to Manjeet. What sort of global vision do you think is required to stop warming?
Thank you. As Arnico said, the world is in such a situation now. The the continuous rise of the emission, mainly coming from the fossil fuel, the deforestation, and number of other anthropogenic activities has put us in such a difficult situation. The global average temperature for past 100 years has already risen by about 1 degree Celsius. If we rely on the plan that the countries have presented, the temperature will go beyond 3 degrees, which will be very difficult for us to adapt with. So only relying on the funding that will come to our countries, only relying on the support that we receive, our future will not be easy to deal with. If we get a lot of money and if our ice are melting, if our jobs are in problem, if the tourism is in a difficult situation, then that's not going to help. So the first priority would be the countries with a higher emission particularly, and others who can help, who can contribute, have to reduce their emission. As I said earlier, the target that the countries have taken under the Paris Agreement in 2015, which Nepal is also a party, has agreed to limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But the current trend, the business as usual, is not taking us anywhere there. The way the current emissions are rising will take us beyond the 3 degrees Celsius. One of the main source of emission coming up is through coal. Last year, to some extent, the coal emission has flattered, but also the other sources like the gases, the use of the number of other petroleum product has continuously rising. So that has to be stopped. When we see all this discourse, we see that what will be our priority as a country like Nepal? Do we have any role in terms of also reducing emission, or who should do that? I think it's very clear, and in the global agreement, the UN process, it has been clearly mentioned in terms of the responsibility of the country. It has been clearly mentioned about the vision, as I said, 1.5 degree. So things has been agreed at the global level, but now it's a time to act. The long-term vision is to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. To do that, we cannot wait up to the end of this century. Every year from now up to 2030, the emission has to be reduced by 7.6 degrees Celsius. That's what the global report has presented. But that doesn't mean that we have a time up to 2050 or by the end of this century. So it is every year the action has to be taken. And in that case, the lead role has to be taken by those industrialized countries who have greater responsibility, but that doesn't mean that others can shy away with that. So that's what has been agreed at the global level. And also the developing countries will require some support to take forward the initiative at the national level. So in order to stabilize the concentration of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the emission would have to stop increasing and then decline. Because as Arnico said earlier, the greenhouse gases that are there in the atmosphere has a long-term life. If we stop even today, they cannot, the curve will not decline from tomorrow onwards. So the more delay we'll do, the more expensive and more difficult the situation will be. So it is absolutely important that the time is running out and the time to act is now, and our action must be ambitious. Everyone, we are all on the same boat. It's not that we finger point with other and someone doesn't act. So failing to do so will have severe consequences for all of us and also for our future generation. We have seen the enormous momentum the youth has created around the world. So I think let's respect and respond to the voice of that younger generation so that we can hand over this world in a safe way, the way we got to the future generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manjeet. I think we all appreciate that sentiment a lot. And I think what really resonated with me and probably with a lot in the audience is this talk about action. We have science, we are developing the policies, but we need to bridge it to actions as well. So Bindu, if you could talk a little bit about the role of youth in bridging the gap between science and policy and action, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So I would like to start by saying there is no silver bullet in solving climate change. So oftentimes when we start talking about climate change, what we think is maybe there is some solution which will be magical and then it will help us mitigate the crisis that we are into. But then just stressing that there is no silver bullet in solving climate change. Every action counts. And as a young professional who is working in the interface of science and policy and trying to drive climate action, what I have personally visualized is that in order to meaningfully address climate change, there are a few things we as a young people should be mindful about. And I think the first is being informed in the latest science. Of course, climate change is such a broader issue, and there is so much, like, it is not just about science. There are so many other emotional aspects, societal aspects, and a whole lot of systems related to it. But then, science lies at the heart of climate change. So in order to meaningfully address climate change, we need to be thoughtful and mindful about what science is telling us. And this is not something new that I'm saying, but given the emergency that we are into, for instance, reports have come out that if we are to continue as how we are doing now, like emitting in the business as usual scenarios, we have like maybe 8 to 10 years to exhaust the carbon budget to meet our aspirational vision of 1.5 degree, limiting the temperature to 1.5 degrees. So what does that mean is climate change is not a faraway problem. We are here, we are seeing the impacts all over the world. Vulnerable communities are lying at the forefront. So in order to leverage actions which make tangible impacts in the short term, because we don't have much time. As Arnico also said, our house is on fire, roof is on fire, we need to act now. So for that, what we need to do is we need to be able to prioritize our actions. There are so many things that can be done and everything counts, as I said earlier, but then we need to be able to prioritize our actions so that high leverage solutions be our first priority, and within the short span, we can meaningfully address the change. So my first point will be informed in science if we are to drive climate action. And moving on, I would like to stress on, we had this prior session also, the future of the digital world. We are into this digitally sophisticated world and into the world of the AI and all this technological advancement, and we can't keep ourselves away from that. So as a young people being exposed to all these opportunities, how do we leverage them in order to address climate change is so vital and fundamentally important. So the next point will be, with all the knowledge that we have, that science is telling us, how do we in fact translate them into accessible language so that people who may not really understand those facts and figures, if I say like this billion tons of carbon dioxide is pumped out into atmosphere, we have this much years to save the planet. That may not be something that everyone will understand. But as a young people who understand what science is saying, but also is exposed to the digitally sophisticated world, I think we have this potential and we have this opportunity to really use social media platforms and other digital media platforms to tell the stories so that people find what we are telling is like actually accessible. They understand what science is telling, but in a more accessible language. And the next I would like to say is exercising the rights that are guaranteed by our democracy or the governments. That is so much important. We can't keep ourselves away from all these decisions and the policies prospects. So how do we intervene? Not to keep ourselves distant apart from what government is saying. I know there is growing apathy and then maybe frustration from young people like us because we want action urgently and maybe the government are delaying their action, knowing the fact, as Arnico mentioned and our panelist Manjeet mentioned about, before, like science is clear, but then there is not enough action that has been taken. So how do we how do we not keep ourselves apart from the process which are actually responsible and are at the highest level to address this? We need to actually incorporate ourselves into those systems. So my next third point will be able to actively exercise the democratic rights that we are given, not just in terms of voting the right candidate, but then really practicing active citizenship so that we are informed and we know that we have rights to intervene in what is being decided for us. Because after all, the generation we are to live, the young generation are the one who will be living with the climate change for a much longer time than the people who are much elderly than us. So this is the fact we can't deny, so we should get prepared. And how to get prepared, as I would like to summarize, like make sure that you are informed in science, make sure you use the most out of digital platform to tell the story so that the language of climate change is accessible to people from all around the world, and especially the vulnerable communities who lies at the front. And the next will be exercise your democratic rights, so that you don't keep yourself away from the processes, but then really integrate yourself so that you can make meaningful decision at the policy level.
Thank you, Bindu. I think a lot of youths can relate to that. We have a lot of knowledge at our fingertips, but often we don't feel like we are perfect enough to exercise our rights as citizens and advocate for important causes. But no solution is perfect. It's a complex issue, and we all should be doing the best that we can. And while we were talking about solutions, Manjeet, I would like to ask you, we have a lot of science available, and we're developing a global understanding of what needs to be done, and hopefully that'll lead to meaningful policy interventions as well. But despite all of this effort that has been put into scientific research and into global negotiations, what is holding back climate action?
Thank you, Sneha. I'll take this at two different levels, one at the global level and one at the national level. At the global level, yes, absolutely clear. As we discuss here, Sneha, as you said, science is clear in terms of what action has to be done. Our long-term vision is clear, who has to do, that's clear. So what is holding us back? With my experience, I would say it's a greediness of some politician, greediness of some business leader, and so on. The international agreement, as I said, in terms of the responsibility has been clear. In terms of which country to take a responsibility, in terms of which business area has to leapfrog, has to take an action forward. We cannot rely on the coal industry. We cannot rely on the fossil fuel-based industry. How we take the renewable energy movement ahead. Things are clear. So as I said, it's more the way our thinking are in terms of moving forward. If I just take an example of the recent the climate change conference, the UN conference that was held in Madrid, COP25, we saw different kind of countries who try to manipulate their data and present themselves so that they don't have to take responsibility in terms of reduction of emission. There were countries who who put forward their business greed against the future of the humanity. So we have this kind of consequences, we have this kind of mentality at the global forum. So, but having said this all, we will be the country who will be facing the huge impact. It's because of our capacity to respond. It's because of the system that we have in place, the infrastructure that has not been well developed. So, having said this, let me briefly touch on the national context, why we are a little bit backward, or why we are still getting ahead on this issue. What I see when I talk with many of the politicians, many of the leaders, is we see climate change as something that is imposed by others, where we don't have to take responsibility, and our role would be more as a recipients of funding. I think we have to change this mentality. There is something that we can do. Unless we don't change this mindset of a victim narrative, presenting ourselves as one of the most vulnerable country, a poor country. I heard this panel, the distinguished panel mentioned this yesterday, comparing with many other countries. We are not a small country, we are not a poor country. There are many other countries on a backside who we can compare with. So if we take a proactive leadership, we can help to connect this world in terms of solution. But despite of having this, there are some examples that I would like to share which are holding back. Just to take one example, the national consumption of the petroleum product in Nepal has almost doubled in the past 5 years, which contribute a lot in terms of the trade deficit. It was also said in the data published by CBS that the total export that we make, the total money that we earn by exporting, we have to pay double the amount just to import one commodity, petroleum product, which is making our life very difficult in terms of trade deficit. But where our policy is heading, we recently built South Asia first petroleum pipeline from Ullens to Motihari in India. When the world is moving ahead in terms of electrifying the transport, and we built a petroleum pipeline to import petrol from that country who had set a vision to have 100% electric car by 2030. I think we have to think about this consequence, where we will be heading, how it will contribute to our economy. So for me, climate change is not only an environmental problem. How we have to link it with our economy, we have to link it how it will help. Because this mindset of only receiving a fund from other countries will help to solve the problem will not take us anywhere. The other example is, and I think in that note, I just don't want to comment on the government, also appreciate on the note that recently the Right Honorable Prime Minister said he halted the plan when the Nepal Oil Corporation was planning to build another pipeline for LPG gas. His understanding that the Right Honorable Prime Minister presented that since we have a lot of, since there is enormous hydroelectricity that we are developing, we should be dependent on more on our energy rather than importing energy for cooking. So I think on that note, we also have something positive moving ahead. The other example is 65% of our household use biomass in terms of cooking. And this biomass burns has a lot of problem with the health consequences, the way the woman or the elderly or the child has a problem with the air pollution, the health costs that are expanding. So I think there are a lot of co-benefit by taking action at the national level. The international agreement has clearly said that the food security should not be hampered when reducing the air pollution, when reducing the impact of climate change. Our emission, more than 50% comes from agriculture sector and the land use sector. We don't have to take action on that area, but if we take an action in transport sector, if we take an action on waste to energy, if we take an action on against the biomass burning, you forget about climate change, there will be a lot of economic benefit. On this note, I just want to say that the kind of democratic practice that we have, I'm not only relating with Nepal, where the politician come for 4 or 5 years of mandate, there are less examples in the world they can present a vision for the long-term future generation. And that relates very much with what Arnico said earlier about the airport and the action that we have taken in terms of building the pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manjeet. Thank you for that very good, for showing us how there can be a symbiosis between environmental values, economic values, and social values. And definitely on a global platform, when we talk about the actions of polluting industries or polluting countries and the greenwashing that they do, or the climate denial that they have advocated for in the past, or the subversion of climate action through active lobbying within the UNFCCC halls. So all of those are very important and need to be addressed soon. I think I agree with your argument about sustained vision as well. Climate change is a long-term problem, and we need to be looking beyond short-term benefits or gains and looking at more sustainable solutions and more sustainable models of progress and development. Thank you so much for that. Bindu, I want to move on to you, and I think we talked a little bit about what actions youth can do to address climate change. But taking a step back, how can we, how can policymakers or how can we mobilize youth? What kind of messaging can we get across to youth so that they're more likely to step forward and help with this emergency?
Yeah, so to address this question, as I said, I come from a veterinary science background, and I'm into this climate change campaigning and communication for the last 7 years. What I'm trying to say is, how do we encourage young people to take action, and how do we motivate them so that they are the ones who are taking the leadership on the front lines? Is that make sure that there is inclusion when we are addressing climate change. Because as we just discussed, it's not about short-term goals, like meeting short-term some solutions. We don't want that the solutions of today becomes the problems of tomorrow. So what we need to do is make sure that there is inclusion in the decision-making process, even in the activism, so that there will be holistic approach in addressing the issue, like for the long term. And for that, I would say, we discussed it before as well. Science has been clear for so long. But why hasn't there been tangible action? I think one of the main underlying factors is that how well was the inclusion? How well will the people from different sectors been represented when those decisions were being made, when those consumptions about fossil fuel were being made? So the thing here is, if we do not try to incorporate people from several different facets and try to bring holistic approach in addressing this issue, I think, as I said, our solutions of today will be the problems of future, as we have been facing. For example, fossil fuel, with the industrial revolution, we thought that burning coals and gas is a magic, and then here we are. The solutions that we thought then are a problem now, and we don't want to repeat that mistake. So what is key here is to address climate change for a long term meaningfully and to address sustainable development goals as a whole. I think inclusion lies at the heart of it, to make sure that not just people from the economic background or from the environmental background or business or corporates, make sure that people from every sectors of life are involved in the decision-making process, also in the policy formation, in activism, in every walks of addressing the issue. I think that is very much key, and that is needed so that more and more young people from every dimensions find some relation. If you find that you are related to a cause, you'll be more prompted to take an action. How I got myself inspired is because I saw the connection that animal sector and agriculture in a whole is getting impacted by the climate change, but is also one of the responsible factors for contributing to the cause. So how people find relation is really how to drive that relation, to make people see that relation, is to make them engaged in the issue so that they can explore for themselves how they are connected. And to address this interconnected issue, we can't think different systems in part. We need to build more holistic approach and think how different systems are connected in this holistic system of Earth, where we are living, and not seeing one system or one function, one element separate from the next, because it's just like, as we talked, it's a system. Earth as a whole is a system, and if we are to, for example, address something, this will have some kind of feedback to the other system. We should make sure that there is some kind of balance so that what we are trying to address maybe for the human benefit does not affect the marine ecosystem or maybe some other forms of life. So I would really say that inclusion lies at the heart of it, and we need to be inclusive in every walks of this talk as we are going through in addressing climate change.
Thank you so much, Bindu. Definitely, inclusion is a big aspect of climate change. And like you said, when we're talking about inclusion, we have to find commonalities and shared values that we can work together on instead of trying to impose our own values on people, which definitely has proven that it's not going to work. So talking more locally, I would like to direct this question to Arnico. How do you think can a country like Nepal take a lead on climate change? And what values can we appeal to within Nepalese to take action on climate change?
Let me divide my answer into 4 parts. Sure. First, the importance of education, and I'll build on what Bindu and Manjeet have been talking about. There's a strong need for youth, for the next generation of leaders and informed citizens to understand climate change, but also to know how to take actions to be able to sort out priorities. And so part of my new work now, building a liberal arts college, let me just tell you briefly. We want to build a college where the graduates don't just graduate with one single skill. Whoever majors in computer science still needs to understand climate change, geography, economics, needs to be able to speak and communicate very clearly and to self-learn. And regardless of what the major subject of study is, our graduates should be able to adapt to future situations and to be the future leaders. But the college design itself should be a model of sustainability. Cement is one of the biggest emitters of CO2, one of the biggest impactors on climate change. How do we design and build a college with more sustainable materials? And how do we bring together students from diverse Nepal, but also from across the region to live together in a living learning community for 4 years to really learn how to work together. The second, individual action also plays a role. How many of us still cook with LPG, with cooking gas? How many of you had tea this morning boiled in cooking gas when you could have used an electric kettle or an induction stove? Guilty here as well. But it would be really easy to move away from fossil fuel use. Same with transport, more electric vehicles, less fossil fuel vehicles. Or even something like this name tag. Such an old-fashioned plastic name tag. This comes out of fossil fuels. It will end up as CO2 in the atmosphere. We're already wearing it. Let's at least make sure it gets reused rather than end up in a landfill and then in the end the CO2 in the atmosphere. There's a lot we can do. We need to be conscious. We need to know what our impacts are. But there's also more thinking about the role of Nepal. There's, I think, 2 key roles Nepal can play besides being the victim of climate change. And one is to set examples. We're a smaller country than some of the countries in our neighborhood, so we're more agile, we can do things more quickly. And the work we did at EC Mode with brick kilns really shows the way, where we worked initially with just 100 kilns in the Kathmandu Valley to improve combustion efficiency, reduce air pollution, and reduce CO2 emissions from those kilns through reduced coal combustion. We had kiln owners from India and Pakistan come see what we were doing, led to changing of the rules in Pakistan, and to a transformation of 20,000 plus kilns in Pakistan now towards 100,000 kilns across South Asia. We can set examples here. We can probably switch to electric mobility faster than some of our neighbors can if we really want to do it. Also, the fourth point in terms of Nepal, a second point in terms of Nepal's role on the world stage, we need to have a louder voice. And I'm really happy that the government has taken up this plan for a Sagarmatha Sambad, hosting a global dialogue on climate change issues, and it's a good start. We're in a situation, and we're actually well placed in Nepal, in a relatively neutral country, being able to bring together our neighborhood into a dialogue, bring together people in ways that they otherwise wouldn't be able to, and to get them to stop fighting about stupid little political issues and start addressing the major issues that are really going to affect everyone's lives. So we need to play a much louder, much bigger role in bringing our neighbors and other countries together and demanding agreements on climate change, and to really call out the ones we need to. We hosted the president of China here. We didn't call him out in China being the largest emitter of CO2. Our neighbor to the south is also a very big emitter. We are vulnerable, but we also have our voice. We need to speak out more. There's no more time to be polite. We need to take leadership from the youth all the way to senior leaders of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnico. And I think it's really important to emphasize the power we have as consumers and citizens. And with that, I think I'd like to take questions from the audience. I would just give me a brief second to scan through the questions. We have a really interesting one, and I think one that's quite controversial, from Raman Shrestha. So he addresses this to Ms. Bindu Bhandari. He says, I firmly believe that the environment can only be saved by capitalism. Thus, policy-wise, what could be necessary what would be necessary to encourage private companies to go green and sustainable?
That's an interesting question. Thank you. So I think yesterday in the panel, we discussed a bit about CSR. Why CSR is no more a responsibility, but it is more of a survival these days. And as I mentioned about inclusion, private sectors, of course, is an integral part of addressing climate change. So I think Arnico put it very beautifully before about the college that he just talked about, the liberal arts college. The model in itself should be sustainable. And oftentimes when we address climate change, we often see it from the negative angle, from the perspective of like being it called a threat, emergency, which kind of gives us a like that pessimistic thought. But I think for us to not just live with the changes in this world of climate emergency, I feel like we need to thrive in. And how do we thrive in with so much of challenges around is make sure that innovations, we give enough spaces for the innovation. And I think in this stage, we are at, in this position to actually grab so much of opportunities to think beyond stereotypes and really redefine what we mean by economic prosperity. I think there is so much of opportunities to make sure that the model that we are that we are developing is sustainable in itself, so that we don't need to play the role of victim always, but then step ahead and set ourselves as a leader. There is so much of things, new things that we can do in, and I think with the challenges, these challenges, we are provided the opportunity to try and test out new solutions, not just for the private sectors, but for scientists, for policymakers to test out the ways in which we define the issue and we define the solutions to address them. So I think it's more about redefining how we see prosperity, not just in terms of like money or capitalism, but more into sustainability, more into well-being, more about co-benefits, more about multi-solving.
If I can just jump in also, I think switching to investment in green sectors will be good for profits as well. There's no other way. There's a lot more opportunity for profits for growth in areas of clean energy than buying shares in Saudi Aramco or some other fossil fuel company, for example. And that will become increasingly clear. There'll be increasingly fewer people even willing to buy shares in companies that are bad for the environment, bad for climate. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Talking about the fact that investors are actively moving away from investing in companies that have their models revolving around fossil fuels is an important one. It's a global phenomenon and it's happening quickly. I think the next question we have I guess it's a general question, so anybody feel free to pick it up. We're all talking about global warming threats. However, these talks are confined to policymakers or think tanks. What is being done to bring this issue to the general public so that people take it as serious as an epidemic? So I think we've talked a little bit about how to engage youths. Maybe if somebody could pick this up and talk about how to bring the issue more towards the rest of the public.
Thank you, Sneha. I'll just pick one example from the youth, and then I'll jump into the broader policy front. The way the temperatures are rising, which has already risen by about 1 degree Celsius, the global projection shows that by 2035, it will reach 1.5 degrees Celsius. The older generation, who are beyond 60 years old, there will be very few, looking at the world life expectancy, who will be experiencing that. But almost all, 97% of the youth who are below 16 years age will be experiencing that situation in 2035. So this is the problem that will have a longer term consequences. As I said earlier, the kind of practice that we have when the government come for 5 years and try to come up with immediate solution, want to deliver something by next year or within the frame that they are elected within, the confined up to 5 years, that is not going to solve the problem unless we have a broader thinking for long-term solution. I think here, yes, absolutely. If we take an example of Nepal, this issue hasn't been broadened to that extent at the business leader or at the policymaker front. But when we see this at the global front, there are countries the leaders who get elected, if they talk about climate change, and if they don't, they are in problem. There are some cases, some of the countries who denying climate change has win, but there are more other cases on the other side where the politicians are more and more coming on this front. So unless we don't link it with the broader economic front of our country, the example that we took about the import of the petroleum product and another example, it will be difficult to convince them. So I think the momentum is coming up, the way the youth have helped to get more attention, the way the politicians are also coming up, and the way the the policymaker have started understanding it. I think it's just a matter of time. Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one more burning issue given the present context of Nepal. So I think Arnico and Manjeet also briefly touched upon that Nisgad International Airport. So in terms of development, we are in the drive for decentralization, which we talked about, is a panel yesterday also talked about a lot. So in this drive for decentralization and development, in this modernization and globalization in this drive, what our mindset in a way have kind of been is that development always leads to destruction, which of course is not true. And I think, for example, how we can link policies and all these global negotiations and diplomacy world to public is really through storytelling. And for instance, giving an example of Nisgad International Airport, what a group of young people are trying to do is they're trying to relate the issue, it's not just about chopping off 2.4 million or how many millions of trees. It's more about so many other factors, so many other co-benefits that are related to it. So how do we define, how do we exactly put forward the issue? I think that plays a crucial role in how we address it. So I'm saying that we need to find innovative ways in which we phrase these terms, these new buzzwords, so that the language is accessible and people who may not necessarily come from the science or technical background can understand it and can relate to it so that they feel inspired to take action. And storytelling is a powerful means, audiovisual, maybe translating into local language. I think several efforts have been made by government to localize the efforts by implementing various measures at the local government level, but which of course is not enough. As I said, there is no single actor which can address climate change, and there is no single solution which can address climate change. Everything counts and everyone should be on board.
If I can also just add in about the question about how to get the public to be more aware. We're at an event sponsored by Nepal's largest media group. The media has a very big role to play, not just an opportunity to inform the public, but a responsibility. Not everyone might be looking up at the ceiling and seeing that it's on fire and know what to do about it. The media has a role to play there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we've talked a lot about shared values and inclusion, and I think that is the way forward, finding that symbiosis, the co-benefits that exist between the environment, society, and economy as well. This has been a great panel. Thank you so much, panelists, for this well-rounded discussion on the science, policy, and behind climate change and climate action as well. Thank you, enthusiastic audiences. I hear scattered clapping here and there, and we really appreciate that. Thank you so much.